Good morning. This hearing will come to order. Commissioner Koskinen, I appreciate you coming here and preparing your testimony. I think we're all aware, probably painfully aware, that it is tax day today. So we chose this day because we figure you're not particularly busy. But I know millions of Americans are trying to comply with our tax code. My wife was talking to me actually last night. Now, she was a former IRS agent. And now that I've got my job, she's actually doing our own family taxes, and she did ask me when you retire from this gig, will I take it back over? But I think I'm pretty satisfied with the current arrangement, so I'd like to do that. But of course, it's tax day, which is different from tax freedom day. So I did ask my staff to find out when that is, which means that's the day when Americans actually have paid taxes to the federal government. So all the money that they've earned up to that point in time, on average, goes to the federal government. Past that point, they get to keep the fruits of their labor. So that's Tax Freedom Day is April 24th, which my recollection of this is actually starting to move back a little bit closer to the actual tax day, but it's still a very long period of time that we work for the federal government. Now, as is my custom, I've got an opening statement which I will ask unanimous consent to enter in the record. And I always get it because Senator Carper is just a nice man.
Reserving the right to object. I will not object.
Without objection is entered. But what I would like to do is read something else, and this is a letter we received from a constituent, and I think it's pretty appropriate to read today. It's a little bit longer, but if you'd bear with me, I think this would set really the discussion that we need to have today, because it's a serious letter. There's some serious concerns. Senator Johnson, we are writing to you because we are not sure where else to turn, and also to make you aware of yet another issue with our affordable health care. We are both retired. We live on a moderate annuity payment, which we each have in Scott's Social Security. We have been receiving a distribution from Additional Retirement Plan, which was discontinued in May of 2014. By the way, let me mention, this is written to me by Scott and Julie Thompson. They did allow me to use their name, which we're finding is getting more and more difficult to have taxpayers allow us to use their name, because they are concerned if the IRS knows who they are and they're complaining about something at the IRS, they're afraid of being targeted. Now that's pretty sad. But anyway, Scott and Julie Thompson were willing to let us use their name, so let me continue. In the spring of 2014, we moved back to Wisconsin from Colorado to care for Scott's elderly, dying father. In doing that, we moved out of the network of our Colorado health insurance. With the changes in the health insurance for 2014, we were buying a high-deductible health insurance plan through an insurance agency in Colorado. At that time, our income was too high for us to qualify for subsidized premiums. In April 2014, we contacted the health insurance marketplace, as that was the contact for health insurance coverage for Wisconsin. We were unsure if we would be able to change insurance in the middle of the calendar year. We spoke with a marketplace agent who informed us that we had two qualifying events: the move from Colorado out of the network of our health insurance and the substantial reduction in our income as of May 2014. We were told we were eligible for coverage through the marketplace and arranged for coverage with a plan that has providers in our area, effective June 1, 2014. We were told that we were eligible for a premium credit and arranged that the full premium credit would be applied towards our monthly premium, leaving us with a monthly cost we could afford, just over $400 a month. We were told we needed to submit proof of our new current income by July 20th, which we did. In response, we received a letter from the marketplace dated September 20th, 2014, stating, quote, "We have verified your information. Your eligibility as described in your eligibility determination notice will continue unchanged." Fast forward to February 2015. In the process of completing our 2014 federal income taxes, we now find out that our total income for 2014 is being used as the basis for our eligibility for the health insurance coverage. With that, we are not eligible for subsidized premiums and are now told we must pay a penalty, returning the entire subsidy amount of $11,550. There is nothing in the reporting process which allows for taxpayers to report when there was a qualifying event. We knew that our income in the first half of 2014 was too high for us to be eligible for coverage. That is why we had to buy our own insurance in Colorado. We were very straightforward about our situation in coming back to Wisconsin when we spoke with the marketplace in April. We were told that a qualifying event would make us eligible for the premium subsidy, even in mid-year. Now again, this is a couple moving to Wisconsin to take care of for a dying father. They followed all the rules. They talked to people they thought were knowledgeable. They were told they would be eligible for a subsidy, and now all of a sudden they're finding that they're going to have to pay back $11,550 of subsidy. I'll continue. Our entire gross annual income for 2014, including the distribution received for 4 months early in the year, and Scott's Social Security is just over $62,000. The penalty being imposed is $11,550. This is 18.5% of our entire gross annual income. Considering the fact that it is being imposed via our income taxes, it is actually going to have to be paid out of our after-tax dollars, raising that percentage of our income even higher. And for a real ironic turn of events, we will possibly have to withdraw this money from a retirement account, which will create $11,550 of income, which will probably create a penalty for our 2015 coverage. We don't know what this threshold is for eligibility for health insurance, but an $11,550 penalty on an annual income of approximately $60,000 for 2 people seems excessive. We really don't have any options except to pay this penalty in order to file our federal and state income taxes by April 15th. We do intend to file an appeal with the marketplace. We did not do anything criminal. We did exactly as we were told by the agents for the marketplace. We paid for coverage, even when it was very expensive, so that we would be compliant with the new law. Moving to Wisconsin was a difficult, emotional time for us. We were thrilled that our new circumstances would allow us to have some good health insurance coverage. We never expected that what we were told would not be true. It seems to us that there must be many other people who had things happen to them during the year that affected their health insurance and their ability to pay for it. Can you help us at all? Scott and Julie Thompson. Now, the sad fact of the matter is, and this is what this hearing is about, is how the IRS is trying to comply with the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. That law that's in place now didn't particularly protect Scott and Julie Thompson. And there are thousands, if not millions of Americans that we know lost their health care coverage, are paying higher amounts, are having to comply with now an even more complex tax system. And of course, that's really the purpose of the hearing is how is the IRS trying to grapple? Again, I've got a great deal of sympathy for your agency in terms of the task it has trying to deal with and help taxpayers try and comply with the even added complexity of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. So again, that's the purpose of the hearing. I'm looking forward to your testimony and your answers to our questions. With that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed ranking member, Senator Carper. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I will say that this is not unusual that taxpayers are afraid to offer their names because of feared retribution. I mean, that's very prevalent in people that certainly I talk to. And that's a real problem because of the targeting. And I think it makes it even more important that we actually hold people accountable, that the American people see that those that did the targeting are brought to some semblance of justice and that it's actually corrected in the IRS. I mean, this is a problem. And is very prevalent. This isn't just something that's unusual. It did strike me, I was actually surprised that this is the first time you've ever heard that the marketplace or one of the exchanges gave out incorrect information. I would think that because of the complexity of the law would be far more prevalent. I mean, that's...
Well, no, I meant in terms of an individual being told the wrong information about the validity of their income. Obviously, as has been widely publicized in this first year, CMS has been very forthcoming about the 1095 information returns and the errors that have appeared in some of those, and have been trying to make sure that taxpayers get the updated, correct information in their 1095As. I know CMS has been working with thousands of taxpayers to make sure that the information in those 1095As is correct. So to that extent, clearly, in a transition year, there have been a reasonable number of cases, but still compared to the 4.5 million taxpayers we expect to file, the numbers are surprisingly smaller than you would expect. But you're exactly right. As you would expect in the first year of one of these programs, some of the information returns have had to be corrected, have had to be updated. Some taxpayers appropriately have said the information in that return doesn't correspond with my either the payments I've made or the premium support I've gotten, and there are 30 or 40,000 of those that are being worked through by CMS.
You said I think correctly, and you did correctly state that what they're paying, the $11,550, isn't a penalty. It's just reimbursement of the subsidy that they were, incorrectly provided. But again, they view that as a penalty. I mean, and you can kind of understand that. They followed all the rules, and so I was just reading what they said.
Yeah.
I take your point. But speaking of penalties, that's one of the things I found interesting in the briefing packet here, that the average penalty paid by people that individuals decided to really exercise their freedom and not purchase insurance. But by the way, is that a penalty or tax? That $95 or the greater of 1%, or is that a penalty or tax? I forgot how that's ruled.
The ruling, I think, has been it's a tax. It's called
It's
the
a
shared.
tax.
It's called the shared responsibility payment.
Okay. So anyways, so my point being is the average tax, shared responsibility tax, is not the $95 minimum. It's the 1% of income, which ends up being about $172. Is that correct for this year?
I don't have that number, but clearly 95 is the minimum, but it goes to 1% of your income.
And it's the greater of.
Yes, and it's $95 for adults in your family. So
Right.
if you have 2 or 3 people.
So if you extrapolate that, that's about 80% higher than the minimum. So the average at 172 is 1.8 times the minimum 95. So if you extrapolate that to next year, the minimum penalty would be $325, correct?
Yes.
Or the greater, or 1% of your income, whichever is greater.
Next year it goes to 2%, I think.
Oh, it goes to 2. Okay, it goes to 2%. So, okay, so I just did the math on 1%. It's going to double that then. So what I was looking at is $325 at 1 times 1.8% would be $588. Double that then, correct? So the average tax penalty will be closer to $1,200 next year.
Well, the 1%, you don't add both the 95 or the.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to extrapolate what this is going to be in the future.
Clearly, the statutory shared responsibility payment is geared to go up, and that's designed to encourage people to get health insurance.
So I'm trying to figure out about what we can extrapolate that penalty will be next year. So you're saying it's the greater of $325 or 2% of income?
That's right, but let me
next
just
year.
check. I have experts here.
Is that correct?
Yeah, okay. The consensus is we think it goes to 2%. We'd be happy to make that clear. In any event, either way, the statutory framework provides that the payment goes up if you don't have coverage in the second year to a reasonable higher amount than for the first year. So it will be increasingly encouraging people to buy health insurance.
Right. So here's my point. Because what gets laid out there is the $95, the $325, and the $695. There's kind of, people, that's a number.
Right.
And then it's percentage of income, the greater of. So this year, the percentage of income is really what drove it. So the average penalty was 1.8 times that minimum $95. So if you extrapolate that, if it's 1%, it'll be $588 next year. If it's double that, it'll be $1,176.
You wouldn't.
I think you would. If you're talking as a percentage of income, that'll be a pretty good extrapolation in terms of what the average penalty would be. If this year's is 172 at 1%, next year's at 2%, it'll be $1,176. And the third year of the implementation of Obamacare, then we could look for, instead, not $695 as the minimum penalty, extrapolate our experience from this year, it'll be closer to $2,500 will be the average penalty paid if Americans don't, if the Americans exercise their freedom and choose not to buy an individual policy. So I just kind of want to lay that on the table there. That is what the government is going to tax. I think it's a penalty, but that's what we will tax American people for not buying health care. I was a little surprised. I shouldn't have been surprised. Only 4% of the subsidies that are provided are calculated properly. And you say about half of them are calculated too high, half of them are calculated too low. Do you kind of expect that trend to continue?
No, I think
it's just going to always be difficult to calculate that and estimate it, correct?
No, I think what's going to happen right now, 70% of people, give or take a little, get refunds in their taxes generally, and they do that because we all over-withhold. Nobody knows exactly, well, if you get the same job and don't do anything different, you know what your income is going to be. But most taxpayers estimating their income understand you can't estimate accurately, so they tend to over-withhold so that, in fact, they get a refund rather than having a tax owed. We expect that taxpayers have done that. Nobody tells them they have to do that. Taxpayers do that learning the situation. We expect that what will happen is people will be careful in estimating their income as the basis for calculating the premium tax credit, and they will make sure that they overestimate their income to make sure that, in effect, the adjustment is in their favor when they get to file their taxes. So we expect that as consumers adjust to the law, that increasingly what will happen is that there will be positive increases in refunds or declines in amounts owed because people will have adjusted to the fact that you want to be careful when you estimate your income, and you want to build in the possibility that you'll get a pay raise, your spouse will get a job, and if there's a big change, again, you should call the marketplace. But I think what we've seen in withholding generally is people are careful, and they basically, in the case of, make sure that they have a refund coming rather than the tax owing.
Very quick last question. How are you coming in terms of 100% income verification to really evaluate the correctness of those subsidies? Do we have 100% income verification now?
Well, to the extent we ever have 100% income verification, and that's one of the reasons I say it would be nice to get W-2s in January rather than March, most taxpayers are trying to be compliant. They provide us their income, and we then audit it over time when we get information returns. Ultimately, it's as correct as what the taxpayers tell us and what the information returns do. We assume, ultimately, that the income provided to us after the fact is correct.
Okay, thank you. Senator Carper. Langford. Mr. Commissioner, in probably June of this year, the Supreme Court is going to be deciding on a IRS ruling in the King v. Burwell decision. Has the IRS done any planning in case that ruling comes down and is an adverse ruling in terms of your rulemaking?
Now, as I said earlier, there are a wide range of possibilities of how the Court's going to rule in terms of both what it decides and how it decides it wants to have its ruling implemented. And in light of our challenges just moving forward, and actually, as I say, next month we have to start preparing for the next filing season, there's no way we can adjust the filing season planning and trying to anticipate the various options. So much like we do with tax extenders, we basically run on the assumption life will continue to look like it is, and then we have to adjust afterwards.
Again, so bottom line, no planning whatsoever. If the Supreme Court rules the way I believe the law is written, that the subsidies can only be paid through exchanges established by the state, that's going to create some real problems for the IRS, correct?
But it depends on how the Court rules. The Court could
Again,
rule.
I understand that, but let's say they actually follow the law and the way it's written, and they say that only subsidies can be paid through those exchanges established by the states. We've got how many states that have federal exchanges? How would you possibly handle that? I mean, have you made any, again, my question is, have you given any thought to that, any planning whatsoever in terms of that very possible eventuality here?
No, there will be a set of issues. There, just as with statutes, there are policy questions about how to implement them. Some statutes are passed, and then people are given more time to transition. So depending on what the Court decision is, there will be policy decisions made about how to transition from one point to another. But depending on the decision, it could make life much more complicated for everybody.
You weren't Commissioner when that ruling was handed down, correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever look into or research how that ruling was developed?
No. I have a rule of life. I've spent 45 years parachuting into 20 years in the private sector, 20 years in the public sector, agencies under and organizations under challenge. And my rule of life is play the hand you're dealt and move forward. And so that decision was made before I got here, and my job is to administer the agency as best I can where we are.
So you've never looked into whether or not the IRS was working hand in glove with the White House and trying to get direction from them in terms of how they should rule on that?
No, except as a general matter, we don't work with hand in glove with the White House in anything about these. The policy discussions we have are primarily with the Treasury Department. The regulatory process is worked with the Treasury. But I have no idea who talked to whom and how that process and those decisions were made.
Okay. So the IRS is also responsible for evaluating the exemptions for the individual mandate, how many Americans in general, or what's the estimate in terms of Americans that will qualify for the various exemptions that have been provided for?
At this point, as I say, we haven't pulled that data out of the return, so I can't give you an answer on that. But the assumption was basically that probably more people would file for exemptions, exemptions, or that they had coverage for part of the year than people who will pay the shared responsibility payment. It will be, a number that we'll actually see, and as I say, in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll be able to accumulate all of that data and understand where it is.
And again, those that would be granted exemptions, that's going to be pretty much on an honor system? I mean, is there going to be any way of trying to verify that, other than just through a potential auditing process?
Yes, so what we'll do in all of these matters, as we always do, is when the computer selects returns that have issues, whatever they are, when we go into those, then we look at everything. And so of this 75% of, give or take a little, of Americans who've checked boxes saying they have coverage, if we actually have an issue with your return, we'll ask you for backup support for the fact that you had coverage because you said you did. So we will track through when somebody says, well, I had a hardship, and it turns out you made a lot of money, and we're auditing you on that basis. It will be noted that, well, you applied for this exemption you don't seem to qualify for, and then you're subject to, in effect, penalties and interest. And the penalties for purposely understating your income can over time mount up.
Getting back to the couple that wrote me the letter and their $11,550 of subsidy they have to repay, and just the timing of that. I mean, at what point in time, if they're just unable to repay it? I mean, they were talking about because they don't have the cash on hand, they don't have the ability to pay, other than potentially having to pull money out of their retirement fund, which is a pretty high penalty for doing that, correct? I mean, if you pull money out of your retirement fund, there's what, a 10% penalty on that, plus you have to count as income?
Only if you've already retired and you're 59 and a half, then you can pull money out of your retirement fund, and all you do is pay income tax on it. There's no.
But they're not retired. They're actually, well, they might have been retired.
They might be. Well, they might. If they're over 59 and a half, they don't have that problem, other than you pay tax on it because that's how the fund works. If you're under 59 and a half, then there is a penalty.
Okay. So again, somebody in that situation that was working, they had to pay that back. If they had to pull out, they may be paying a penalty in that.
Right.
What about the timing of paying the subsidy anyway?
As I've said, you can actually go online, and if you qualify, in a case like this, you probably would, you can do an online installment agreement with us that would allow you to spread those payments over time, and you can do that online, or you can call us after the filing season. Hopefully, you'll be able to get through a little quicker, and you can arrange that, so you don't have to immediately take draconian steps to pay everything on time if you've got legitimate concerns. And it sounds like in this particular case, an online installment agreement or an installment agreement, online or otherwise, would be an appropriate response.
Over what time period would that be installment?
It depends on the situation, but it's usually over 3 to 5 years.
Do they pay interest on that as well?
If you haven't paid on time, then there's an interest charge, but there's no penalty charge.
Okay, what's the interest payment on that?
Interest rate goes at the government interest rate, which these days is, very, very low.
Okay. That's all I have, Senator Carper.
Not that I want to encourage people not to pay on time, just because the interest rate is low.
I understand. Commissioner, I appreciate that. I mean, the fact of the matter is the agency has lost credibility. That credibility needs to be restored. I hope you do everything you can to restore that credibility. Appreciate your service, your thoughtful testimony, your forthright answers to our questions. This hearing record will remain open for 15 days until April 30th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.